So recently I've seen a rather strange idea spreading around the Linux community, and that idea is that you shouldn't identify with the software that you use or have any real emotional investment in it. And to be honest, I find that to be a really weird idea. So in today's video, I just want to say it's totally okay to identify with the software that you use, and I'm going to explain why right now on the Linux Lounge. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining Odysee, the freedom-respecting alternative to YouTube. Links in the description. So, I do just want to start off this video by saying that yeah, I do understand why this idea has gotten pretty popular. It does seem to be a pretty intuitive stance that it's a bit weird to identify with being a Linux user or something like that. But to be honest, when you really sit down to consider it, it's not actually that weird. You see, people define themselves by their hobbies all the time, and that's totally fine. People like sports fans and music fans especially strike me as the main people who tend to define themselves by their hobbies. If you're into Linux, then IT is probably your hobby. So it's not really that different to being a sports fan or a music fan. That said though, usually people who are against people who identify with the software that they use are also against people defining themselves by other hobbies, which I find is a really weird opinion to hold. Now, this is part of a much larger argument, but I do think I'll still address it. Usually people who have this opinion, in my experience, tend to be more conservative, and generally speaking, I seem to find that these people think that others should identify with a religion or a culture or something like that, which, that's totally fine, and if you want to do that, that's fine. Live your best life. But it is ultimately still just as arbitrary as identifying with a piece of software. So I guess my point here is that no matter what you identify with, it's always going to be fairly arbitrary, so don't worry about what other people identify with. It's also probably worth bringing up the fact that there is a pretty big political element to Linux and free software. People tend to hold their political ideas as the most integral part of their identities, which does make a lot of sense. Given the fact that Linux and free software are both political movements and hobbies, it's pretty easy to see why people identify so strongly with them. So I just want to finish off this video by saying at the end of the day, it's human nature to get very invested in things. And to be honest, it is fun to care about things so much. So it kind of strikes me as a little bit odd that people would say that you shouldn't do that. Because at the end of the day, to me, it kind of seems like it would be a pretty boring life if you didn't get really invested in things. But that's just kind of the way that I see it. So I know that this has been a bit of a short and probably fairly controversial video, but I did just want to make a response video to all the people who are saying that you shouldn't identify as a Linux user or you shouldn't identify with what particular software you use. I do just want to say that it is totally okay if you want to identify as a Linux user or if you want to identify with any particular piece of software. So with that said, I hope you got something out of this video. As always, my comment section is always a place to discuss ideas if you want. But with that said, I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.